I watched my wife publicly humiliate me over intimacy at a dinner party. I hired a lawyer, served divorce, gathered receipts, and reclaimed dignity. Auditioning for a reality show about toxic relationships? Well, that's exactly what happened to me 3 weeks ago. My wife decided to test my commitment to our marriage. And let me tell you, she got way more than she bargained for. Started on a Wednesday evening, I came home from work ready to relax when she hit me with the first curveball. "I don't think you appreciate me enough," she announced, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed like she was delivering some profound revelation. No hello, no how was your day, just straight to the accusation. I looked at her, genuinely confused. "What do you mean, did something happen today? See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You don't even know what you did wrong." She shook her head dramatically, like I had just confirmed her worst suspicions about me. The thing is, I honestly had no idea what she was referring to. We'd been married for 4 years, and sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing major had happened recently. I tried to think back through the week. Had I forgotten something? Missed an important date? Left the toilet seat up? "Look, if I did something to upset you, just tell me what it was. We can talk about it like adults." But she wasn't interested in talking like adults. Instead, she launched into this whole speech about how I take her for granted, how I don't show enough affection, how I'm not romantic enough. It was like she'd been storing up complaints for months and decided to unleash them all at once. The weird part was how rehearsed it all sounded, like she'd practiced this conversation in front of a mirror. But I figured maybe she'd just been thinking about these things for a while, and finally worked up the courage to say something. So, I did what any reasonable husband would do. I listened, I acknowledged her concerns, and I promised to be more attentive. We even had a nice dinner together that night, and I thought we'd work things out. Boy, was I wrong. The next day, she came at me with a completely different angle. This time, it was about how I don't include her in my decisions enough. Apparently, me choosing to grab coffee with a CO worker during lunch was a major betrayal of trust. "You never ask what I think about anything," she said, pacing around the living room like a lawyer making her closing argument. "You just do whatever you want without considering how it affects me." I pointed out that grabbing coffee with someone I work with hardly seemed like the kind of decision that required a family meeting, but she wasn't having it. According to her, it was symptomatic of a larger pattern of disrespect. This went on for days. Every little thing I did was suddenly evidence of my lack of commitment. I held the door open for another woman at the grocery store. Clearly, I was more considerate to strangers than to my own wife. I watched a game on TV for 2 hours on Sunday. Obviously, sports were more important to me than spending quality time with her. The strangest part was how she'd bring up these issues. It wasn't a natural conversation. She'd walk into a room, take a deep breath like she was preparing for battle, and then launch into whatever complaint she'd prepared for that day. And they were always framed the same way, as tests of my commitment to the relationship. But the real kicker came on Friday night. We were at dinner with another couple, and she decided to put on a show right there in the middle of the restaurant. She started questioning whether I really loved her. "I mean, how can I be sure?" she said loudly enough for other tables to hear. "Actions speak louder than words, right? And lately, his actions have been pretty questionable." I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't about having a conversation anymore. This was about humiliating me in public. The other couple looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and studying their menus like they contained the secrets of the universe. "We can discuss this at home," I said quietly, trying to maintain some dignity for both of us. "No, I think we should discuss it now. I want to know right here, right now, what you're willing to do to prove you're committed to this marriage." That's when it hit me. This wasn't my wife talking. This sounded like dialogue from one of those relationship advice blogs that promise to teach women how to train their husbands. The phrasing, the dramatic timing, the public setting, it all felt so calculated. I looked across the table at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. She was nervous, not upset, not hurt, but nervous, like she was following a script and wasn't sure if she was getting the lines right. "What exactly do you want me to prove?" I asked calmly. She blinked, clearly not expecting me to turn the question back on her. "I will. I want you to show me that I'm a priority in your life. And how would I do that?" Another pause. She glanced around the restaurant as if looking for cue cards. "You should just know." That's when I realized my wife was being coached. Someone had put these ideas in her head, taught her these phrases, convinced her that our perfectly functional marriage was somehow broken and needed fixing. The question was who? I smiled and nodded. "You're absolutely right. I should know exactly what you need from me." I raised my glass. "Here's to figuring it out together." She looked confused by my response, like she'd expected me to either grovel for forgiveness or get angry and storm out. But I wasn't going to give her either reaction. If someone was teaching my wife how to play games with our marriage, then it was time for me to learn the rules of this new game we were apparently playing. And trust me, I've always been a quick learner. Finding out who was behind my wife's sudden transformation into a relationship drill sergeant turned out to be easier than I expected. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. I was grabbing lunch at the deli near my office when I ran into Dave, a guy I'd known since college, who happened to be married to one of my wife's closest friends. We'd always gotten along well, and he seemed like he needed someone to talk to. "Man, you look like someone stole your lunch money," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. Dave laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You could say that. My wife's been on this weird kick lately, testing me constantly. Acting like our marriage is some kind of obstacle course I need to navigate perfectly or I fail as a husband. I nearly choked on my sandwich. Testing you how? Oh, you know the drill. Setting up scenarios to see how I'll react. Making unreasonable demands to see if I'll comply. Questioning my commitment over every little thing. He shook his head. Last week she got mad because I didn't immediately drop everything to help her reorganize the closet. Apparently, that proved I don't prioritize her needs. The coincidence was too obvious to ignore. Let me guess. This all started recently, like within the last month. Actually, yeah. How did you... His eyes widened. Don't tell me your wife is doing this too. I nodded grimly. Same playbook, different player. Dave leaned forward, lowering his voice. Dude, I think I know what's happening. My wife's been spending a lot of time with her book club lately, but they're not reading novels anymore. They're all obsessed with this relationship guru who writes about how women need to test their men to ensure they're truly committed. What kind of tests? All kinds of crazy stuff. Making unreasonable demands to see if you'll comply. Creating conflict to see how you handle it. Questioning your love publicly to see if you'll fight for the relationship. He counted them off on his fingers. The idea is that if a man really loves you, he'll do anything to prove it, even if what you're asking is completely ridiculous. I felt pieces clicking into place. And if he doesn't jump through every hoop, then obviously he's not committed enough, and you need to escalate the tests until he either proves himself or reveals his true colors. Dave rubbed his temples. It's like they think marriage is a video game where you have to keep leveling up to prove you're worthy of the final boss. This explained everything. The rehearsed speeches, the dramatic timing, the way my wife seemed nervous when I didn't react the way she expected. She wasn't coming up with this stuff on her own. She was following instructions from some relationship expert who probably never had a successful long-term relationship in their life. So, what are you doing about it? I asked. Dave sighed. Honestly, I've been playing along hoping it would run its course, but it's getting worse. Yesterday, she demanded I prove my love by canceling my weekly poker game with the guys. When I explained that I'd already committed to hosting this week, she said that proved poker was more important to me than she was. Did you cancel? Of course I did. I didn't want to deal with the drama. He looked miserable. But now she's talking about how I need to show more initiative in proving my commitment, like canceling poker was just the entry-level test. I sat back, processing this information. So it wasn't just my wife. There was a whole group of women who'd been convinced that their marriages needed fixing through manipulation and testing. And they were all getting their strategies from the same source. Dave, what's the name of this book club guru they're following? I don't remember exactly, but my wife has like 3 of her books. Something about unleashing your feminine power and commanding respect through strategic relationship management. Real pseudo-psychology nonsense, but they eat it up. And all the wives are applying these techniques at the same time? Seems like it. My wife mentioned that several of the other women were having breakthrough moments with their husbands recently. They're probably comparing notes and encouraging each other to push harder. That explained why my wife seemed so confident in her approach despite being clearly nervous about my reactions. She had a support group telling her she was doing the right thing, that this was normal and necessary for a healthy relationship. The more I thought about it, the more irritated I became, not just at my wife, but at whoever had convinced a group of women that manipulation was the key to marital happiness. These weren't relationships on the brink of divorce that needed dramatic intervention. These were normal marriages with normal problems that were being turned into battlegrounds by someone selling books and seminars. You know what the worst part is, Dave continued. I can see how it's changing her. She used to be straightforward about what she wanted. If something bothered her, she'd just tell me. Now everything has to be a test or a power play. It's like she's forgotten how to just be herself with me. I understood exactly what he meant. My wife had always been direct, sometimes brutally honest. It was one of the things I loved about her. But lately she'd been speaking in riddles and creating drama where none existed before. "So, what's your plan?" Dave asked. "Keep jumping through hoops until she gets bored?" I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Actually, I'm thinking about conducting a few tests of my own. See how she likes being on the receiving end of this game." Dave raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." "Maybe, but here's the thing. These relationship experts always assume the man will either submit completely or blow up and prove he's the bad guy. They never account for a third option, which is playing the game better than they do." I finished my sandwich and stood up. "Thanks for the intel, Dave. This conversation has been very enlightening." Walking back to my office, I had a lot to think about. My wife wasn't acting crazy on her own. She was following a playbook designed by someone who thought marriages were won and lost through psychological warfare. But every playbook has weaknesses, and every game has rules that can be turned against the other player. If my wife wanted to test my commitment to our marriage, that was fine. But she was about to learn that commitment works both ways, and I was very committed to showing her exactly what kind of game she'd decided to start playing. Armed with the knowledge that my wife was following a script, I decided to study her playbook by letting her run through her routine while I observed. Think of it as reconnaissance. You can't counter a strategy if you don't fully understand it first. The next test came that Saturday morning. I was making coffee when she walked into the kitchen with that familiar look of manufactured concern on her face. "I've been thinking about us," she announced, settling into her chair with the dramatic pause I'd come to recognize. "I don't think you really see me anymore." Here we go, I thought. What do you mean by that? When was the last time you really looked at me? Like, actually looked at me and saw me for who I am? I almost laughed. This was straight out of the Relationship Guru playbook, probably chapter 3 or 4. The "you don't really see me" test was designed to make the man feel guilty and scramble to prove how much attention he paid to his wife. But instead of falling into the trap, I decided to play along in my own way. I set down my coffee mug and turned to face her completely. Then I really looked at her, studying every detail like I was memorizing her face for a police sketch. I took my time, letting the silence stretch until she started shifting uncomfortably. "You're wearing the blue sweater you bought 3 months ago but never wore because you thought it made your shoulders look too broad, even though I told you it looked great. Your hair is slightly different today. You use that volumizing mousse you only break out when you're planning to go somewhere special, which means you're probably meeting the book club later. You have a small coffee stain on your left sleeve that you haven't noticed yet, and you're wearing your grandmother's ring, which you only wear when you're feeling sentimental or nervous about something." She blinked, clearly not expecting such a detailed response. The script probably told her I'd either dismiss her concerns or make some generic comment about how beautiful she was. "Oh," she said, touching the coffee stain unconsciously. "I didn't realize you paid attention to those kinds of details. I notice everything about you," I said simply. "I just don't usually provide a running commentary." She looked confused, like she'd prepared for an argument and I'd handed her flowers instead. But I could see her regrouping, probably moving to the next item on her list. Sure enough, later that afternoon she tried a different approach. I was watching a basketball game when she came and sat beside me on the couch. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said, using the tone that usually made me reach for the remote to pause the game. This time I didn't move. I kept watching the screen and said, "I'm listening." "You're not listening. You're watching TV. I can do both." "What did you want to talk about?" She huffed, clearly frustrated that I wasn't following the expected script. "This is exactly what I mean. You're not giving me your full attention. How can we have a meaningful conversation when you're distracted?" I finally looked at her but kept the sound on. "You haven't actually started a conversation yet. You've made announcements about wanting to have a conversation. When you're ready to tell me what's on your mind, I'll be here, but the TV will still be on because this isn't actually about the TV, is it?" I smiled at her. "You're testing whether I'll immediately drop everything the moment you express a need, regardless of whether it's actually urgent or important. And I'm showing you that I can prioritize appropriately when you communicate clearly." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Another script failure. The real test came on Monday evening. She'd clearly spent the day preparing for this one because she had props and everything. I walked into the house to find her phone sitting on the kitchen counter, screen up, with text messages visible. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice tight with fake emotion. "Look at these messages." I glanced at the phone. The messages were from some guy with a generic name, telling her how beautiful she was and how lucky her husband was to have her. Pretty standard fake jealousy bait. According to the playbook, I was supposed to either get angry and demand to know who this guy was, or get insecure and start promising to be a better husband. Either reaction would prove that I was threatened and therefore truly cared. Instead, I picked up the phone and scrolled through the conversation. It was obviously fake, the kind of thing you could create in about 5 minutes with a burner number or a friend playing along. Interesting, I said, handing the phone back to her. This person has terrible grammar, that's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? Aren't you upset? Aren't you going to ask who this is? I leaned against the counter, genuinely curious about her answer. Should I be upset? Do you want me to be jealous of someone sending you compliments? She stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Any normal husband would be concerned about another man texting his wife. Any insecure husband would be concerned, I corrected. I'm secure enough in our relationship to know that if you wanted to be with someone else, you wouldn't need to show me text messages to make it happen. You'd just leave. But what if I was tempted? What if I was considering it? Then that would be your choice to make, I said calmly. I can't control what you do or who you talk to. I can only control how I respond to it. This was clearly not going according to plan. She'd expected jealousy, possessiveness, maybe even a fight that would end with me begging her to choose me. Instead, I'd given her complete freedom to make her own choices, which somehow made the whole exercise pointless. You don't care if I leave you? She asked, and for the first time in weeks, I heard a hint of genuine emotion in her voice. I'd care very much, I said honestly, but not enough to play games to prevent it. If you want to be here, you'll be here. If you don't, then trying to manipulate you into staying wouldn't give me the relationship I actually want anyway. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the phone in her hands. I could practically see the gears turning as she tried to figure out how to salvage this test. Maybe I should just delete these messages, she said finally. Do whatever feels right to you, I replied. I'm going to start dinner. As I pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, I could feel her watching me, probably wondering why none of her carefully planned scenarios were having the desired effect. The truth was, I was enjoying this more than I probably should have. Every failed test was proof that I understood the game better than she did. But the real fun was just getting started. She'd shown me her playbook, and now it was time to show her mine. By Tuesday, I could tell my wife was getting frustrated. Her tests weren't producing the dramatic reactions she'd been promised, and she was starting to improvise. That's when people make mistakes, and mistakes create opportunities. She tried a new approach at breakfast, going for the direct emotional manipulation route. I feel like we're growing apart, she announced over her cereal. We used to be so connected, and now it feels like we're just roommates. I nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting observation. What do you think changed? I don't know, she said, clearly expecting me to take responsibility for fixing whatever problem she was about to invent. I just feel like you don't really know me anymore. Pretending to consider this seriously, I asked, you might be right. When did you start feeling this way? Recently, she said vaguely. How recently? Last week? Last month? Can you pinpoint when this feeling started? She shifted uncomfortably. The script probably didn't include specific timelines. I guess maybe a few weeks ago. Interesting. That's right around the time you started acting completely different. I took a sip of my coffee and watched her process that. Actually, now that you mention it, I've been having some concerns of my own. Her eyes widened slightly. This wasn't part of the plan. What kind of concerns? Well, since we're being honest about feeling disconnected, I have to say that lately you've seemed like a different person. Like you're following some kind of script, instead of just being yourself with me. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. The dramatic announcements, the manufactured conflicts, the way you pause before speaking like you're remembering lines. It's like you're performing our relationship instead of living it. She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. And here's what really concerns me about that. The woman I married was confident enough to tell me exactly what she wanted. She didn't need to create elaborate scenarios or play psychological games. She trusted me enough to be direct. I leaned forward slightly. So, I have to ask myself, what happened to that woman? And why doesn't she trust me anymore? I do trust you, she said quickly. Do you? Because testing someone constantly is the opposite of trust. It's like checking your bank balance every 5 minutes because you don't believe the money is really there. She was quiet for a moment, probably trying to figure out how to regain control of the conversation. But I had momentum now. Actually, since we're talking about trust, I've been wondering about something else. Where are you getting these ideas about testing relationships? Because they're definitely not coming from you. Her face went pale. What do you mean, come on, 3 weeks ago you never questioned my commitment? We had normal conversations about normal things. Then suddenly you're conducting elaborate experiments to measure my devotion. That's not personal growth. That's outside influence. I've just been doing some reading about relationship testing strategies. That's very specific reading material. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. What I find interesting is that you're so concerned about whether I'm committed to this marriage, but you're taking relationship advice from people who don't even know us. How committed does that sound? She was getting defensive now, which meant I was getting close to something important. I'm trying to improve our relationship by following instructions from strangers instead of talking to your husband. That makes perfect sense. It's not like that. Then explain it to me. Help me understand why my wife suddenly decided our 4-year marriage needed fixing by someone else's playbook. The silence stretched between us. I could see her struggling, caught between the script she'd been following and the reality of having to defend it to someone who clearly saw through it. The book club has been reading about relationship dynamics, she finally admitted. Ah, the book club. Let me guess, they're not reading romance novels anymore. We're reading about how to build stronger partnerships by teaching women to manipulate their husbands into proving their worth. That's your idea of a stronger partnership. It's not manipulation, it's testing, right? Because there's such a huge difference. I stood up and rinsed my coffee cup in the sink. Here's a test for you. How do you think it makes me feel to discover that instead of talking to me about any concerns you had about our relationship, you decided to experiment on me like I'm some kind of lab rat? She didn't have an answer for that. And here's another test. If the situation were reversed, if I started playing psychological games with you based on advice from some guru who told me that women need to be constantly challenged to prove their loyalty, how would you react? That's different. How is it different? Another silence. She was realizing that her playbook didn't include responses to these questions because it assumed the man would never turn the conversation around like this. Look, I said, softening my tone slightly. I understand that relationships require work and attention. If you had concerns about us, I wish you'd just told me. We could have worked on them together, like partners. Instead, you chose to treat me like a problem to be solved, rather than a person to communicate with. I didn't mean it like that. Maybe not, but that's how it played out. And now I'm wondering what else you're willing to manipulate instead of discuss. It makes me question whether the woman I'm married to is the real you or just another performance. I could see tears forming in her eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they looked genuine rather than strategic. I just wanted to make sure you really wanted to be with me, she whispered. And you thought the best way to do that was to make our relationship into a competition I didn't know I was playing. I shook my head. The irony is that all these tests designed to prove my commitment have actually made me question yours. She looked up at me, startled. Because the woman I married wouldn't need to play games to feel secure in our relationship. She'd know her worth and trust that I saw it too. So either you've changed or you never trusted me in the first place. Either way, we have a much bigger problem than whether I bring you flowers often enough. I left her sitting at the kitchen table, probably trying to figure out how a simple relationship test had turned into an examination of her own behavior. But that's what happens when you bring strategy to an authentic relationship. Eventually, someone calls your bluff. That evening, my wife tried to smooth things over with what I can only describe as damage control. She came home with takeout from my favorite restaurant, and that apologetic smile that used to work like magic on me. I thought we could have a nice dinner and talk, she said, setting the bags on the counter. Talk about what? I asked, not moving from where I sat reading. About this morning. I think there was a misunderstanding. I marked my page and looked at her. What kind of misunderstanding? Well, you seemed to think I was trying to manipulate you, but that wasn't my intention at all. There it was, the classic non-apology wrapped in victim language. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry I'd interpreted it correctly. So, what was your intention? I was just trying to strengthen our relationship. The books explain that couples need to challenge each other to grow. The books. I set down my reading and gave her my full attention. Let's talk about these books for a minute. How many relationship experts are you currently following? She hesitated. A few names. Why does that matter? Because I want to understand who's been coaching my wife to treat me like an adversary instead of a partner. She rattled off 3 names, none of which I recognized, but all of which sounded like they belonged on late-night infomercials promising to unlock the secrets of love for 3 easy payments of $19.99. And what exactly do these experts say about trust in marriage? They say that trust has to be earned continuously, by testing your spouse without their knowledge or consent, by making sure your needs are being met and your value is recognized, I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, but I didn't touch the food she'd brought. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. We're going to establish some new ground rules for our relationship, starting right now. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of ground rules? First, no more tests. If you have a concern about our marriage, you bring it directly to me. We discuss it like adults and work on solutions together. The era of psychological experiments is over. You can't just dictate. Second, I continued, ignoring her interruption. You're going to take a break from your relationship gurus, all of them, for at least 3 months. That's ridiculous. You can't control what I read. You're right, I can't control what you read, but I can control how I respond to the consequences of what you read. And if you continue following advice that treats me like an opponent instead of a partner, then we'll need to have a much more serious conversation about whether this marriage is working for either of us. She stared at me, probably trying to determine if I was bluffing. Third, we're going to start over with honest communication. That means no more manufactured crises, no more elaborate scenarios designed to provoke specific reactions, and no more treating our relationship like a research project. And if I don't agree to these rules, I smiled, but there was steel behind it. Then you'll discover exactly how committed I am to not being manipulated in my own marriage. What's that supposed to mean? It means that every relationship expert you've been following assumes that the man will either submit to testing or blow up and prove he's the problem. But there's a third option they never account for, which is walking away from someone who would rather play games than build a partnership. The color drained from her face. This clearly wasn't covered in Chapter 7 of whatever manual she'd been following. You're threatening divorce over this. I'm explaining consequences. You spent weeks testing whether I'm truly committed to this marriage. Well, congratulations. You're about to find out exactly how committed I am to a marriage built on mutual respect instead of psychological warfare. She set down the takeout containers with shaking hands. I never meant for it to go this far, but it did go this far, and now we're both going to live with the results. I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice level. You wanted to know if I'd fight for this relationship. Here's your answer. I'll fight for a real relationship with my actual wife. But I won't fight to stay married to someone who treats me like an experiment. I was trying to make things better. No, you were trying to make me dance to someone else's tune. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment, probably processing the fact that her relationship experts hadn't prepared her for a husband who refused to play by their rules. What if I stop reading the books? She asked finally. That's a start, but it's not enough. What else do you want? I want you to understand why this happened in the first place. What made you think our marriage needed fixing by strangers? What made you lose confidence in our ability to work things out together? She looked down at her hands. I don't know. That's not good enough. If you can't figure out what drove you to treat me like this, how do I know you won't do it again the next time someone convinces you that our relationship needs improvement? I won't. Prove it. She looked up at me sharply. How? Figure out what made you vulnerable to this kind of advice in the first place. Go to counseling if you need to. But don't ask me to trust that this won't happen again until you understand why it happened at all. And in the meantime, we try to rebuild what you tore down with your testing. But we do it as equals, not as trainer and subject. She nodded slowly, tears starting to form in her eyes again. But this time, I could tell they were tears of realization rather than manipulation. I really messed this up, didn't I? Yeah, you did. But the question now is whether you're willing to do the work to fix it or if you'd rather keep pretending that following someone else's playbook is easier than having an actual relationship. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I want to fix it. Then we start tomorrow. Tonight, I suggest you think about who you want to be in this marriage because the woman who's been testing me for the past 3 weeks isn't someone I recognize. I picked up my book and headed for the bedroom, leaving her alone with the takeout and the wreckage of her carefully planned relationship improvement strategy. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's dysfunction, even when that someone is your wife. 2 weeks later, my wife made her choice, and it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with one of her relationship books open beside her laptop. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see the defiance in her eyes. I've been thinking about what you said, she began, and I don't think you're being fair. The experts say that setting boundaries is healthy, but so is making sure your partner appreciates you. I shouldn't have to choose between improving myself and saving your ego. I set down my keys and looked at the book on the table. It was a new one, something about reclaiming your feminine power in relationships. So much for taking a break from the gurus. I see you found new coaching, I said calmly. I found better coaching. This author actually understands that both partners need to work on themselves. And what does this particular expert suggest? She lifted her chin defiantly. That I shouldn't let you intimidate me into abandoning my personal growth just because you're uncomfortable with change. I almost laughed. After everything we'd been through, she was doubling down. So, your personal growth involves treating me like a test subject. It involves knowing my worth and not settling for less than I deserve. And what exactly do you think you deserve? A husband who doesn't threaten divorce the minute I try to improve our relationship. There it was. She'd rewritten the entire story in her head. Now, I was the villain trying to control her, and she was the victim standing up for herself. I walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. What are you doing? She asked, her confidence wavering slightly. Giving you exactly what you deserve, I said, starting to pack my clothes. A chance to find a man who will play these games with you. You're leaving? I'm giving you space to grow into whoever these books are telling you to become. Clearly, that person isn't compatible with being married to me. She stood up quickly. You can't just leave, we're married. Marriage is a partnership, not a research project. You've made it clear which one you prefer. I wasn't trying to hurt you, but you did hurt me. And when I explained how and why, you found new experts to tell you I was wrong. I folded another shirt and placed it in the suitcase. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. Where will you go? That's not your concern anymore. You wanted to test my commitment, and now you have your answer. I'm committed to my own dignity more than I'm committed to being your experimental subject. She was crying now, but I didn't stop packing. This isn't what I wanted. Yes, it is. You wanted to know if I'd fight for this relationship, and I did. I fought for honesty, respect, and authentic communication, but you wanted drama and games instead. We can work this out. No, we can't, because you don't want to work it out, you want to win, and I'm not interested in being married to someone who sees me as an opponent. I closed the suitcase and headed for the door. Wait, she called after me. What about us? What about our marriage? I turned back to look at her one last time. You tested it to death. Congratulations. You found its breaking point. 3 months later, I heard through Dave that my ex-wife had joined a different book club, one focused on healing after relationship trauma. Apparently, none of her relationship experts had prepared her for the possibility that a man might actually mean what he said. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent so much time testing whether I was committed enough to stay that she never considered whether I was strong enough to leave. Turns out that was the only test that really mattered.